Well, welcome to our information session. We have a lot of fun graphics, none of which I designed. So we are part of the New School for Social Research. There are actually 5 divisions of the university. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but a couple of things you might notice is we have Parsons School of Design, which is a really world-famous design program, and there are departments that utilize that pretty heavily. So I think Janet may talk about one of the new tracks in design and anthropology, but there are synergies within departments you might not think of. Creative publishing and critical journalism is another department that really utilizes Parsons to teach the design elements of journalism and publishing. And we have the Eugene Lang School of College of Liberal Arts, and there are a lot of opportunities for students to be teaching assistants or RAs in those programs. So there are a lot of learning and teaching opportunities that come with being part of a larger university. But we are one university. So we are 10,000 students, and we come from 116 countries. We're about 40% international at the New School for Social Research, so there's a really diverse and wide-ranging group of opinions. It's not just sort of a homogeneous population. I mean, we're a really interesting and unique school, which you're going to hear a lot more about, but I think you have a lot of different viewpoints when you're talking about, economics and heterodox economics. It's not just a US centrist program. I love the graphics, but I don't have a lot to say about all of them. So I do want to give you a little bit of the history of the New School because I think that really informs who we are today and also the experience you're going to have today. So we were founded in 1919 by a group of academics at Columbia. They were asked not to speak out against World War I. They were pacifists, and they felt that academics needed not just to have a voice in the journals and in the popular books of the time, but to really have a public voice. And so they left and they came downtown and they started what was called the New School for Social Research. And they taught, ideas on controversial ideas on like race and gender. And it was originally an institution for workers and not for a university for undergraduates. It was really about continuing education. And the president of the university was a man named Alvin Johnson, and he worked in the late 1920s and early 1930s on what was called the Encyclopedia of Social Sciences. This is not like the Encyclopedia Britannica that you may have had as a kid or that I had as a kid and that you've heard of. This was really the foremost thinkers of their time writing entries. So if you wanted to know about aesthetics and have an entry on that, you found the most prominent intellectual to write that entry on aesthetics. And it was broader than what you might consider social sciences. So it would include things like dance and other areas that were not traditionally social sciences. And the reason this is important is in 1933, when Hitler came to power, within 7 days of him expelling academics from the university, Alvin Johnson went to the Rockefeller Foundation and said, I will undersign any visa that you can pay for. So he knew who all of these prominent thinkers in Europe were, and he brought them to the United States, to the New School. We had 180 academics come and start at the New School. Many of them stayed, others went to other universities, but at a time where universities were closing their doors to Jews, to socialists, to people in political opinions that were different from the Nazis, the New School really opened their door. We became known as the University in Exile. And this happened all throughout the war. It wasn't just that initial expulsion of academics from Germany. So when the Vichy government in France fell, we brought in another group of scholars from France. They brought in scholars from the UK. I mean, there were points in the war where you didn't know which way it was turning. And so we have always been a place for academics to come and really have that sort of freedom of thought and opinion. And what was happening in 1933 has some roots in how we treat academics today and what your experience is like today as a member of the New School. So critical theory and historical inquiry is incredibly important then as it is today. So if you're looking at an issue like migration and mobility and what's happening in Europe with Syrian refugees, you don't just look at what's happening in this point in time. You're looking at other historical points in time of migration, mobility, what the great thinkers of their time are saying about these issues. So it's not so much focus on just what's happening in the news, but there really is a deeper understanding of what's happened in history, how that relates to what's happening today, and what great theorists are saying about the issues. Outward-facing scholarship is incredibly important. So that goes back really to the founding of this institution as a place where academics wanted to have a voice outside of the academy. It's certainly true of these group of scholars that came in 1933, but it's even truer today. So there are faculty that publish all the time in the Washington Post, the New York Times. Simon Critchley from philosophy publishes or curates the Stone, which is the philosophy section of the New York Times. We have people who do podcasts, which is a very modern form of media. So people like Claire Potter, Alex Lanikoff, Natalia in historical studies. We don't just write books or journal articles. We actually really find it important that our work be out in the public sphere. Economics is a Schwartz Center for Economic. Can you tell me what's the? I know it. I don't know why I don't have the last two words, but it'll come to me like later in the presentation. And there, analysis, policy analysis, CEPA, right? And there, it's not just about writing white papers, but they actually go to Capitol Hill to present their ideas so that these become part of the public conversation and public debate. So it's really important to our faculty that they actually are presenting in the public sphere. And our students as well. They often work with faculty on these projects, as I think you'll hear. Interdisciplinary study is really important. When all of these faculty came over from Europe, they used to do this thing called general seminar, where every different faculty member from all the different disciplines would come and debate a specific topic with students and faculty. And it's something that still goes on today. They're, I think, reshaping general seminars. So this year it's going to be around the concept of democracy. So it's what do psychologists say about democracy? What do the journalists say? What do the anthropologists or the economists say about democracy? We want to have that sort of public debate that doesn't just silo disciplines in one area. We also have that online with public seminar, but I think you'll find in all of our departments, they bring in disciplines outside of their own. I mean, I think you'll hear it certainly from our faculty that we don't approach economics as purely an economics issue. We don't just look at psychology and exclude what an anthropologist might say or what a political scientist might say. We really try to approach topics and issues in a very interdisciplinary way, and I think that actually sets our institution apart from other institutions. I think often they look at the disciplines in a much more siloed manner. And then a commitment to social justice. So that is, certainly part of the founding, but it's something that is true of our entire university. There is a real belief in this mission of social justice. We're actually the university that's putting together I think a part 2 of the University of Exile. So they've gotten a number of universities as part of a consortium to bring over endangered scholars, from different, not necessarily from Europe at this point, but from other parts of the world. We have a visiting faculty member from Turkey who was in jail. I think the semester previously he was supposed to come as a visiting scholar and wasn't able to join us. But we really, I think, take that to heart in the way that we teach, in the way that students are active in outside of the classroom as well. So I don't know where our students are, and I apologize, but we do have 2 faculty members with us, and hopefully the students will come in at some point. But Ying Chen is a professor of economics, and Janet Roitman is a professor of anthropology. And I do really apologize that the other 2 are not here to join us, but hopefully they'll come in. So I was wondering if you guys could each introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your research, and then I'll ask you also to talk a little bit about your department, what makes it different from other institutions, what the focuses of the departments. And if you guys could talk into the microphones for the audience.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Ying Chen, and I teach economics at the NSSR and also at the Land College. I joined the new school since 2016. I mainly work on sustainable development and political economy with a focus on the Chinese economy and also East Asian countries in general. So I think what makes our program unique is that we are really one of the few economics programs in this country and perhaps even in the world that offers not only just rigorous trainings for young scholars, but also different perspectives to studying economics. We're really doing creative and cutting-edge work, and it has always been this tradition for our program since I think Robert Hellburner was in the department. I think lots of students come into our department because they read, Hellburner's Worldly Philosophers, which give them some ideas that particularly the idea that economics is not just neoclassical economics. Economics is just not just about rational choice, right? There are different schools of thoughts. Also, I always like to emphasize that students are very important, and the peer, your classmates, are going to make a significant impact on your learning experiences here, because you do not just learn from classes, right? You learn a lot through having discussions with your classmates, having study group with them, and you're going to meet excellent students, just as all of you are here, students who are making big impacts in the world. I can maybe give some more example in the later session.
Yes, thank you. Welcome, everybody. So I'm Janet Roitman. I'm in the Anthropology department, it was just said. My research initially focused on Central Africa, so specifically Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad. Today, well known for the fact of Boko Haram being there. So I'm mainly thought of as an economic anthropologist. That original research in what's called the Sahel in that part of Central Africa was about unregulated commerce in the region, which still is going on, and the way that it impacted the state and the state capacity to regulate local populations. Right now, I've moved somewhat more to the west, and I'm working on the emergence of fintech, financial technologies in Africa. So my teaching really, I teach also both at the undergraduate and graduate level. My teaching very much focuses on general topics of economic anthropology and what's now called the social studies of finance. And what we could sort of give a general sort of a gloss on is the anthropology of value. So as you can imagine, that's very interdisciplinary. I can say more about that if you have questions about that with respect to my own work. As far as the department goes, it would be an understatement to say that we are interdisciplinary. For one, we're a very, very small, we are 8 faculty members now, a very tightly knit department. Students go directly from the master's to the PhD if they're admitted to the PhD program, so we don't have any external admits. So that means we're all working together very intensively. It's a high mentoring situation where if you come into the program, you are without a doubt working with at least 2 faculty members who you've chosen, who have agreed to work with you, et cetera. So there isn't any kind of like fishing around for someone to mentor you, which is a great strength of the department. But secondly, and this is where we're very different from most anthropology departments, I think maybe all, in this country, is that we're not area studies focused. So many anthropology departments kind of, when they hire faculty, it's one person who works on Africa, one who's focused on China or East Asia, Latin America, et cetera, et cetera. So there's an area studies focus. That's not the way we're structured. For one, we're all share an approach, which is we could call concept work, which is sort of Michel Foucault / Bruno Latour in terms of the genealogy of it. But most importantly, every single faculty member brings a very, very distinct interdisciplinary approach to the department. So I'm just going to go through this very quickly, but Ann Stoller is noted for having started sort of the whole movement in history and anthropology. Larry Hirschfeld has a co-appointment with psychology and anthropology. Hugh Raffles has a degree in environmental sciences, and anthropology is very well known for his work on nature and culture. Miriam Tickton, who does work on humanitarianism, comes from sort of a gender studies, medical anthropology lens. Nick Langlitz not only teaches medical anthropology, but he is a physician in his own right, and then did a degree in medical anthropology in California. Have I gone through everyone? Abu Farman is a practicing artist and plastician. also has a degree in anthropology. And recently joining the department is Shannon Mattern, who comes from media studies and is heading up a new program in anthropology and design studies, or anthropology and design. And then there's myself, I already told you, so I'm sort of at the cusp of, I actually have a degree in political science and with a qualified also in anthropology. So, and I come from political economy and anthropology. So it's not just that we sort of pick a little bit at other departments or other approaches. We're really fundamentally interdisciplinary, our makeup in the new school tradition that was already outlined. So.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the way you work with students, either on research, supporting fieldwork they might be doing, papers you might be writing? Yeah.
Sure. So basically, we have this mentored research course that are particularly designed for master level students. So master level students can choose to work with any faculty in the department on a kind of milestone project that they're interested in. So for this kind of research, we usually meet with students, twice, every other week, and talk about the literature and help students to kind of narrow down their research interests into a feasible research topic, because a lot of students coming to the department have a lot of interesting big ideas but have problem of turning it into actually a feasible research question or a publishable kind of paper. And faculty are really playing a role to help students with this kind of transition from just a student who is sitting and taking courses to a successful scholar. For PhD students, of course, faculty offer dissertation advising, which is it's basically the same format as how we advise MA students as well. Also, every faculty member has their own research assistant, and so the research assistant will have chance to engage in professors' research projects, and which sometimes lead to co-authorship opportunities, which is also very, very rewarding for any young scholars. And I myself am advising quite a lot of students at this moment, both MA students and PhD students. And in addition to that, I'm also organizing reading groups among some graduate students on the literature that are not currently being covered in the curriculum. And I know some of my colleagues are also doing the same thing, and not just based on our own interest, but also based on students' demand and students' interest. So in that sense, the reading group would be in a more informal setting, and sometimes with food, and so basically the interaction is pretty much relaxed and comfortable, and you will find that the faculty-student interaction in our department, I think in NSSR in general, is very is much less hierarchical in a sense, and I'm sure you would enjoy it.
So similarly, I think it's true.
Yeah.
I think all departments have basically the similar structure for interacting with students. Specifically in the anthropology department, we have shared with economics, we have research assistants and teaching assistants. So we work with them just in the venue of the classroom and developing a syllabus, and they're very involved in what we're doing in terms of instruction in the classroom. Alongside that, we run pretty much every 2 weeks is a student-run workshop. Professor Ann Stoller oversees that. She has done that now for over 10 years, but we're all involved in it. And it is content in terms of content, and the actual activity that happens during the workshop is defined by the students. Sometimes they invite people in. Sometimes they want to just have a conversation with us about how to turn piece of writing for a seminar into a publishable article. Sometimes they want to hear from doctoral students who've just come back from anthropological fieldwork. So it runs the gamut of meeting to discuss anthropological texts all the way to more professional kinds of conversations. And so that's every 2 weeks. And similarly, it's relaxed. There's a lot of pizza and beer, and that's nice. And what they do in that context is they also generate a group of students generate a topic for a student conference that they run every year, and that's a lot of collaboration. The faculty participate in that. Either we present or we're discussants or whatever the students want us to do. Pretty much, it's their show. But that's another thing that's developed sort of in tandem with the faculty or in collaboration with the faculty. Likewise, we have a Wednesday evening seminar. It varies. It's at least once a month, but it's required. It's like I put that in quotation marks because it's really the moment when students and faculty have an invited guest, and we consider it the time when we all really have to show up because it's sort of when we hear each other talk about work from outside of the new school. And it's really important to think about why we all have different positions about different kinds of work, and how it gives us a sense of how our department is forging some kind of intellectual community by having an outsider come in and discuss with us. So it's really, really important for the identity of the department and for students feeling like they're involved in sometimes very high-level conversations, and they realize that they're actually really quite up to it. So it's a really nice moment. Likewise, I'm currently co-director of the Habrunner Center for Capitalism Studies, and I'm also organizing a reading group, and eventually we're going to have a workshop with invited guests in May at the end of the spring semester. Ann Stoller runs the Institute for Critical Social Inquiry, and there are 3 invited guests every June of every year, and students apply to be a part of those seminars. I could go on. There's also the Zolberg Institute on Migration and Mobility, which the students are very involved in as well, sometimes through fellowships, and the JIDEST, which is the Graduate Institute for Design, Ethnography, and Social Theory, which is also student fellowships. Students go to seminars, et cetera. So there's a lot of sort of different sites for interaction and combining both mentorship of student projects, but also students getting to sort of participate in larger conversations about scholarship. So,
I think you guys have answered the question about what makes us different in the grad landscape. So I only have one more question, then I really want to open it up to everyone here to ask theirs. Outcomes. So I know, the intellectual pursuit in these programs is incredibly important, but so is what happens afterwards. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what students in your program do when they leave the MA or if they when they leave the PhD, and also what kind of support the department or NSSR offers students.
Sure. Yeah, this is definitely a very important questions. Students in our department come from very diverse background. They also have very different interests. Some are interested in doing academic work. Some are interested in, working in international organizations. Others are interested in, political work. But regardless of their interests, they usually are able to find support from faculty members and from from the network of alumni. So, for example, recently we have a PhD student who ended up teaching in research universities such as York University in UK, or in University of Massachusetts Amherst, or Utah, University of Missouri Kansas City, and or liberal arts colleges such as Sarah Lawrence, Denison, John Jay College. A lot of them have landed these academic positions. And we also have students graduating to work for United Nations, international labor organizations, World Trade Organizations. And we also have very interesting, outstanding students who graduate and become ministers of their own home countries. And if you join the economics department now, you probably will run into some ministers now, actually, minister of certain countries at this moment. The most recent example we have is one student, Heather Baushi. She is also a PhD student from New School, and she served as the economic advisor to Hillary Clinton. So you clearly see that a lot of students are not just interested in abstract theories. They're actually interested in making some impact in the real world. And the support that we gave to the students, I'm going to focus on the academic support that we're giving them, and especially in their search for academic kind of job, is that we have this job placement committee in the department. And therefore, we are able to offer institutional support to PhD students throughout the whole job search process. So we prepare students from very early on about what kind of materials, what kind of documents they need to have for the application, and what to prepare for the interviews. And therefore, I think the outcome was pretty successful in terms of placing students into good academic positions, and also other research institutions. And also, I think I mentioned briefly that many faculty members are very willing to work with students on a co-authored project, and this is also very helpful for students to put into their resume when they're trying to apply for jobs.
Yeah, so similarly, well, one, because we're such a small, very tight-knit department, the mentoring is very intensive. I don't have the number in front of me, but we place a great number, I mean, I don't know the percentage, but very high number of students who leave the master's program either go on to very, very prestigious departments to pursue a PhD if they don't stay with us. And our PhD students have gone on to tenure-track jobs, to work in non-governmental organizations, as do some of our master's students, and into fields like global health or journalism or human rights work. So there's sort of a whole breadth of different outcomes as far as where they end up. We similarly, before I came here was doing this, work with the students to prepare a proposal so that if they want to go on to the PhD, they typically do apply to our program. We can't take all of them because there's typically maybe 15 students graduating per cohort. So we work very intensively with them on refining their proposal. For PhD students, they'll do mock job talks. We really right through the end till they're actually placed somewhere. We have a committee that works very closely with them. We also have increasing numbers of students who come in and are potentially coming to the master's program, are potentially interested in a PhD, but aren't 100% sure, which is fine. We have students from all sorts of backgrounds, so that's not unexpected. And one of the things that has come up, which was really driven by student demand, so students started articulating a desire for not just interdisciplinary work, meaning working between history and anthropology or something like that, but they increasingly were taking classes at Parsons School of Design, and we're thinking, could they produce something like a portfolio instead of just ending with a certificate that says I have a master's in anthropology, or a transcript that says that. So we're building that out. We've now have what we're calling right now a track in anthropology and design. Students take a lot of cross-listed courses. I'm teaching one actually this semester called Concept, Work, and Materialization, which I'm teaching with two well-known faculty in the School of Design. And the idea is that opens up a whole set of possibilities for students in terms of different kinds of job opportunities or creative practice. A lot of those students are really interested in digital media, in infrastructure, so things about sustainability, and that's sort of what we're addressing those interests by opening this up. Likewise, we're building out another track called Science and Society, which will be looking at things like biotech, questions of ethics related to global health, et cetera. Also a track on migration and mobility. I think it's pretty well understood that population movements are part of our present and our future. So that's another track that is being built out. And that's sort of to give students more options in terms of being in a master's program, thinking probably about a PhD, but being able to explore more broadly. So yeah.
So what kind of questions do you guys have? So they can talk not just about their departments, but also about the community at NSSR. As they've already been talking a little bit about relationships with students. What kind of questions do you guys have?
It's the thing you said about the between master's program and PhD program, and also getting that was probably some between their response.
Yes, definitely. So we have both internal admits and also external admits, and I think a big percentage of the MA students came to our department actually already have decided to go for PhD studies, and for these students they actually have an advantage because they've already taken core courses, and have already have interactions with faculty members, and therefore when they're applying, they will have support from individual faculty member, which is really helpful. I think Dana might have an exact number, but the thing I have here is that we, I think, have sometimes we'll have 7 to 8 internal admits from the MA program, and a little over 20 external admits, and which in the end, because some students, turn down the offer and things like that, and in the end we will have around 10 admits annually, which I think internal admits might make more than half of the final admits. Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
oh,
you
yeah.
can probably correct if the number is not.
Yeah, I mean, the actual number of admits varies from year to year. I will say that the admit rate internally is always higher in departments than the admit rate externally. Anthropology and psychology only take students from within the department. So we don't take any external admits for those two departments. We only take internal PhDs. But in philosophy, economics, politics, sociology, because you get to know the faculty, you already have faculty that want to work with you and support you, the admit rates are much higher for internal candidates than they are for external candidates. But that's why you're admitted to the MA and not directly into the PhD, because there is sort of a second step application process. So you're asking what the rates are. I don't have the rates on hand, and it really does vary from year to year. Some years you'll have a very large cohort of students, and other years you have a smaller cohort, and the incoming class, the incoming PhD class is our largest one for psychology is 15. Economics typically is around 10, but some departments will only have 3 or 4 in their cohort. Often it's 6, somewhere between 6 and 7. So it really, these are not huge PhD cohorts. It's why there's so much mentorship and support that we offer compared to perhaps some other programs. But the internal mix versus the external mix really varies from year to year, and it depends on the quality of the internal class too. Mm-hmm. You had a question, right?
Hi, I had a question about the actual application process, specifically about the writing sample. So I know that you traditionally it's like a 10 to 20 page piece of like academic work that we've done. But if you're applying to the creative publishing or critical journalism track, you can also turn in a substantive article or blog instead of the research paper. What does sort of substantive entail? Would we like turn in a piece of, or like a sample of work that is the same 10 to 20 page sort of cap, or yeah?
So I'm going to go through the entire admissions process, and I'm going to cover these kinds of topics, but just briefly since you brought it up. So for journalism students, you can submit a journalism piece. And so substantive means like it shouldn't be, a half-page blog post you wrote or a Facebook post you wrote. It should actually be something that shows your writing ability, your critical thinking. It doesn't necessarily have to be a research piece. And sometimes students in the journalism program will submit 2 or 3 pieces that get to that 10 to 20 number because they don't have one 15-page article. That's kind of unusual in the journalism world these days, although we do teach long-form journalism. Other questions? Yeah, I'm going to, just because it's a longer walk, we're going to start here.
Thank you very much. I have 2 practical questions, more than the detail of the academics. When you come from another country, you're thinking about how can you support and live in this city. No? One of the questions is the opportunity to work inside of the university, some hours, I don't know exactly. Another practical question is about our teachers. What kind of support for the student during the career or the master? That's if they have some examples, that's good to know. Thank you. Yes, it's about imagine somebody staying there in some class and needs some support, technical support. Maybe they have some examples of students that need some help. That's it.
So we do offer a writing intensive course that's free for international students. We have all of our international students take a writing exam, and so there is academic writing support. But maybe you guys can talk a little bit about what happens when a student, has trouble with a concept or struggles a little bit in a class. What kind of support exists for the student?
Well, one thing I think it's important to note is, again, the percentages will have to come from the experts, but we have a very high percentage of international students. English is not their first language. So that's something we assume in the classroom quite regularly. And yeah, so there supports the intensive writing. There is a writing center that I encourage strongly, and funny enough, even these students who I encourage always come back and tell every single student in the class that they must use the writing center, because it's fantastic and it really helps enormously. But the students themselves are very proactive about this because there are so many international students. They have their own reading and writing workshops. They have, for one of our core seminars, which is the first year, master's students take a core seminar. It's very demanding. It's a lot of reading, and they read together and they, work through it together. And I think that they've developed their own support structures, not to say that we don't. We also have students who have various so-called disabilities, meaning, needing support because of dyslexia or other things like this, which we grant extra time. We don't give exams, but we give an exam at the end of our master's program. Departments differ on this, but students get the supports that they would get at any other institution for that. Yeah, I think that. I don't know if you wanted to add something to that.
So let me address your first question first. So you're talking about the opportunity of work within the university, right? And I think both Jeanette and I have mentioned that students normally have chances to work as teaching assistant, research assistant, and teaching fellow. For the economics department, actually, this is a really good time for you to think about applying, because we also are offering this fellowship to 5 incoming students every year, and I think for 3 years, right? Which include
So it's I'm going to talk.
tuition free.
Yeah, I'm going to talk
You
about
can
funding a
probably
little
talk
bit,
about
but
more.
that department has 5 full fellowships that include, if you're a PhD student, tuition for
Tuition
3 years and all fees for I think 7, and then a stipend of 20,000 per year for the first 3 years. If you're an MA student, it's awarded to you. It's a 5-year award instead of a 3-year award, because we're expecting you to stay on for the PhD.
Yeah.
And then there are also, I think, centers too that offer a lot of positions on campus. So we're going to look at a couple of the interdisciplinary centers, but there are a lot of job opportunities that are academic in nature that are not solely honed within the department. And also, I put that big list of schools here. So students teach at Parsons, they teach at Lang, they teach even at COPA, or College of Performing Arts. So there are a lot of opportunities to work on campus. And then there's also the sort of other kinds of jobs that come along with the university. So we have a number of students that work in the admissions office as a whole, in the libraries and those kinds of places.
Yeah, and also, I mean, even outside campus, there are a lot of teaching opportunities for graduate students. I mean, we have lots of colleges in the New York City. I mean, and I mean, actually, there's a high demand for. I mean, especially for economics, there are high demand for the core courses that PhD students in our department are very much qualified to teach. And to your second question. Actually, I mean, we do have a lot of students coming from different background. I mean, I think Jeanette mentioned about the percentage of international students. In our department, it's more than 50% of every year. The students, half of the cohort are actually coming from international background, and also quite a few of them actually came from different majors, not necessarily economics, from sociology, policy. So we do have students who never really had like mainstream economics training. But for those students, we're also offering what we call grad level courses. For example, I myself am teaching a grad level microeconomics, which is different from advanced level microeconomics. The idea is that we have this graduate level courses, which is more targeted toward master students who come from different interdisciplinary background, so that we are covering topics that would really help them to feel confident and to prepare them for a more advanced level of courses. So in that sense, we do have this kind of step-by-step kind of build-up kind of support for students from different backgrounds.
And actually, your department also offers a free math camp over the summer, right? For those students who are interested in economics but perhaps don't have the same kind of math background. It was started by students. They really wanted that support, and so before classes even begin, you can come for a free math boot camp. I'll make the long walk to the back of the room.
Thank you. I had two questions. The first one is for the anthropology department. Do you know how many students in the master program come from an anthropology background? And my second question is, to what extent does the new school and the department fund and allow for research abroad specifically?
So I honestly can't give you numbers, and I don't want to make numbers up, but the vast majority of our students coming into the master's program in anthropology do not have a background in anthropology, and we welcome that. Given that we all, I think you came in maybe after my presentation, but we all ourselves straddled or came from different departments and different practices, including someone who's a plastician, a visual artist. So we welcome that. And secondly, your question was, yes, I was actually thinking while you were speaking, this is another, I think this falls somewhat in the category of support. We have funding for students to do field work over the summer. We feel it's really important for students coming out of a very empirical tradition, which anthropology is, to they'll develop stronger projects if they're intended to go on to the PhD, especially if they're able to do some kind of real field work. So we do, over the summer, we do provide funding. It's on a competitive basis, but it's really the idea is to help you to know what it means to apply and submit a request that is significant. Yeah, and there's also funding for students to attend conferences. We do prioritize the field work because we feel that's most important. But yes, that funding's definitely there. Yeah.
Other questions? I pause like I'm not supposed to.
Sorry about that. Thanks. I was wondering about the interaction of the university and the city, and also in terms of other institutions in the city, and sort of and also, I guess pros and cons, but also the presence of faculty in the sense of community, and whether or not that's still possible to have one. I'm sure everybody is off in a million directions, and
A great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing is that I'm always so impressed every year when the students put on the student conference, is that I realize how much they work with students across the university, especially NYU, City University, Columbia University. So that's just by virtue of being in the networks of, they'll go to a different campus here in New York City to hear a lecture or something, and they all end up knowing each other through all their, I'm sure, the Facebook housing pages and things like this. So that's a great plus about being in New York City. That said, we also are part of a consortium. So, for example, when I teach a graduate level class, I inevitably have students from City University, from Columbia University, from NYU also in my class. And likewise, our students go to Columbia University and NYU and CUNY and wherever else, to Rutgers and Princeton are also in the consortium. And they do that regularly. And it's sort of, I think that it's one of the reasons they like being at the New School, in fact, is they know that they have this larger sort of world that they can draw from. But the faculty also commerce a lot between the faculty and these other campuses. So when we even right now, Ann Stoller is actually teaching a course with a faculty member from another campus. And they move between, I think she's from Columbia, but they move between 1 week they're in our campus and the next week they're at their campus. So there's a lot of movement. Yeah, I think that the thing about the challenge of maybe not having like a quad where everyone's kind of in the quad is, so we build things out like the Wednesday evening seminars and the workshops that give a sense of place. And we do that very intentionally. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that or.
I actually wanted to add something more for the previous question about the support for field work. I mean, in economics, field work is not the most standard methodology, but we still do have students. We still have econ students actually use ethnographic approach to do their research. And one of the funding source that I encourage you to actually take a look at is the India-China Institute, also part of the New School, and they support students to do field work during the summer, and particularly students who are interested in studying India or China. And I have quite many students that I have worked with who have taken advantage of that opportunity and found it rewarding. And also about the inter-university kind of collaboration, I have experience, for example, inviting professors from other universities in the city to give guest talk in my own course and do it in their course as kind of an exchange. But that really helps students to expand their horizon. Also. Students in that sense, like Jeanette was saying, I see many students. I know many students are taking courses in Columbia and NYU, and I also have students in my class that are coming from other institutions. So this kind of interaction seems to be quite common.
I would also add that it's not just guest speakers in classes, but in fact, we have a large number of faculty from across the globe that come and give lectures at NSSR. If you look at the events page, I mean, this is sort of the wind down at the end of the semester, but you will see, especially historically for this semester, how many great minds from across the globe come and stop here for a lecture, partly because of who we are, partly because we are located in New York City. So we attract really interesting speakers in very different departments. I'd also say that some departments, the fact that we are located in New York City is critically important. So the journalism program. This is where the intellectual publishing industry is. It's not anywhere else in the United States. It's really important that if that's what you want to do and you want to connect and network, that you be located here. I've heard our historical studies faculty talk about how many great archives exist in New York that just don't exist in other parts of the country. And so you have access to resources that you might not have access to. And the consortium they're talking about is for PhD students. It's not for MA students. But you have access to these faculty at other universities who do sometimes serve on dissertation committees because you've met them in class, because you've had connections with them, just based on where we're located.
Yeah, just to add to that, I was actually a graduate student in New York City, and I must say there cannot underestimate the fact of being in New York City and all the people who come through here. It's a huge bonus, and that's not only through the departments, because there is the Harbauer Center for Disruptive Capitalism. There's the India-China Institute. There's JIDES, which is the Graduate Institute for Design, Ethnography, and Social Thought. There's the Zollberg Center for Migration and Mobility. I'm sure that's the biggest list. There might be one other, but so there are constantly seminars organized and conferences organized through those centers as well. So it's not just the departments.
Other questions? Yeah.
I just had a question if anyone could talk a little bit about the sociology program, maybe research topics or anything really.
So I'm actually going to run through the departments that aren't covered here, but do you guys have connections with sociology you want to talk about, or should we leave it for me to talk about in a couple of minutes?
Well, I teach a lot of sociology students, so sociology and anthropology share the same floor, so we do interact quite a bit. There's right now quite a bit of work done by students around media, media production, cultural production, two very well-known faculty members working on that, and so therefore a lot of students as well. And I've been collaborating more and more with faculty and students around questions related to economic sociology. So that seems to be the two areas that I'm very aware of, just through my interactions with the students. And but yeah, that's
I'm going to talk about some of the other departments that we didn't talk about today. So I'll definitely cover some more in sociology. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You're welcome to stick around, but you're also welcome to head out and have the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much for your
Thank you
questions.
guys. So I am going to talk about the other departments and also about the process of applying. So our masters are 30 credit programs. In psychology, does anyone here have any of our psychology students already have a master's in psychology? Okay. What we offer is advanced standing. If you have a master's in general psychology, then you can apply for advanced standing and get 18 credits towards your MA, and only have to do 12 here before going on to the PhD if you're admitted to the PhD program. And then in economics, we also have a master's of science, which is a 45 credit program instead of a 30 credit program, and that is for students who want more than the MA offers, but less than the full PhD, and there isn't that same dissertation process that you would have if you were a PhD student. PhD programs, for the most part, are 60 credits, and that is inclusive of the 30 you do at the MA. So it includes either the 30 you do here or the 30 you would do elsewhere if you're applying here as an external PhD student. Clinical psychology is 90 credits, and that is mandated by the APA. We're an accredited program. And you need to have a master's in order to apply for our PhD program. So if you don't already have a master's in a related discipline, then you need to start at our MA level. There are some times where they will say, okay, so you're just in the sociology PhD and your master's degree is in politics, but you took a lot of sociology courses, and I see the transferable credits. But if your master's is in literary studies and you want to apply for the economics department, they're not really going to be able to find those transferable credits. So just keeping in mind when you're applying that you need to have 24 to 30 transferable credits in order to be eligible for PhD admissions. Otherwise, you need to be applying for the master's. And we already mentioned that we accept external applicants for economics, politics, philosophy, sociology for the PhD, and in anthropology and psychology, we only take our own MA students into the program. So these are the programs that that offer both the MA and the PhD, and then I'll talk about the other ones in a couple minutes. So our philosophy program is primarily a continental philosophy program. Most U.S. programs are analytic, right? They're very logic heavy, and there are faculty who do logic. That is a component of the department, but really these are faculty that focus on sort of the European philosophy tradition. History of philosophy is really important to the faculty. So they're doing people like Foucault, Derrida, Kant, Hegel, and less of really that logic component. So it sets us apart. I had the good fortune of traveling to Europe on behalf of NSSR, and I can't tell you how many people were interested in philosophy and said, I want to study German philosophers, and I have to go to New York to the US to do it, because there just aren't that many programs in the US that offer, or even in the world that offer this type of philosophy, and there are some really prominent and very well-known philosophers on faculty. I should have said in the beginning, but if you look at any of our departments, there are really prominent philosophers, and if they are here, they are teaching and they are supervising students. So you won't see names on that list that you think are really prominent, but whom you'll never meet because they are just associated with the university or they have a research grant. They are actually here teaching if they're not on sabbatical and working with students. Our politics MA is really qualitative and not quantitative in its approach, which is different than most programs. There are some faculty like Diva Woodley who do some quantitative work, but mostly it's a qualitative, and they look at things like American political thought, political theory, comparative politics, global politics. But it's different than, when you think about like politics in the US and they say data is destiny, right? Demographics, that's not what our department does. They're doing a much more qualitative approach to politics, and there's a heavier theory emphasis. Our psychology master's is a general MA in psychology, and it is psychology of the mind. It's not industrial or organizational psychology. There are really two camps that sit within the psychology department. One is clinical, and those are people who will, typically if they go on to the PhD, be connected to a university and have research, but who are actually treating patients. And then cognitive social developmental, and those are typically people who are research psychologists working at a university. So if you want to treat patients, then you want to be on the clinical side. If you're more interested in doing research, then you're on the CSD side, but you don't necessarily have to know that going in. And there are in fact students who do both. We have a new faculty member in psychology, Adam Brown, who does global mental health. He's really interesting. He has a Fulbright grant. He's gone to places like Switzerland to do research, not just on the mental health of refugees, but also on the refugee aid workers, because they are really impacted by the situation. And he's a graduate of NSSR. He got a PhD and was supervised both by Bill Hurst, who's one of the co-chairs on the CSD side, and by the clinical side. So he had both of that education at the PhD level. He went to Sarah Lawrence, taught for a number of years, and then came back to us just this year to bring global mental health into our psychology program. But you would apply in your second year for the PhD, and that's where you would really make that distinction. At the MA level, we also offer a concentration in substance abuse and mental health counseling, which does lead to licensure, and it includes clinical work in the New York City area. We have a number of hospitals, and there are 14 labs. So as an MA student, you are very much involved in lab work, whether on the clinical side, it might be on the Center for Attachment Research with the Steels that look at infant and toddler attachment to parents. Doris Chang has a really interesting lab that looks at how race affects how you would treat patients. We have faculty on the CSD side who look at things like memory. Those that sort of, it's interesting. Wendy DeAndrea on the clinical side does trauma, and then Jeremy Genghis looks at like how I think traumatic effects impact memory. So things like he looks at the Middle East and how people see issues there. And I think there's an interplay there between the clinical and the CSD side as well. And then our sociology program, similar to our politics program, is qualitative and not quantitative in its approach to learning. There are a number of students who are interested in gender and sociology. Media certainly is a big part, media and sociology. Urban sociology, Terry Williams is a really prominent urban sociologist. He writes, I feel like, a book every year, and has students who work on that track with him. Political sociology, sociology and theory, history and sociology. Both politics and sociology offer on the PhD side a concentration in historical studies when you're doing your PhD. So it's a more qualitative approach to sociology, and there's a heavy emphasis on ethnographic work. On the MA side, we have a certificate in, a master's in historical studies, and this is really modern history. It's about the last 200 years, and it's history of ideas and movements. So things like history of violence, history of capitalism. Federico Finkelstein does a lot of work on populism and fascism. So it's not, history in the 1500s in this region of the globe. It really is about bigger ideas. And there's a lot of American historians in the department currently. Liberal studies is a choose your own adventure. So you only have 2 required courses. You have an intro course, which is looking at modernity, and it really teaches students to think critically and to read sort of important philosophers of our time. And the last class is a capstone course where you work on your MA thesis or your MA project. And everything you do in between is up to you. So it's a very heavy investment in mentorship in this program, because you can choose not just from across NSSR, but from across the grad landscape. So if you're interested in arts and aesthetics in the philosophical context, but you're also interested in fashion, you can take classes at Parsons so that you're really doing arts and aesthetics in a more interesting and comprehensive way. So there's a lot of support for students to kind of have a program that is meaningful to them. Typically, it's on the humanities side, so it's not that you couldn't combine economics and psychology in this program because of the format of it, but it's not the orientation of the faculty. They're more interested in arts, aesthetics, philosophy, literature, critical media theory, those types of areas. And then we have creative publishing and critical journalism, and this is a really unique program in the journalism publishing world. Most programs are either journalism or publishing, and this is really both. When they founded the program, they wanted a program that got students jobs, because unlike some of our other departments where you hear a lot of interest in the PhD programs, you're really going into this program because you want to work in the industry. And so there are 2 practical courses that are lab classes, one where you are working on designing a website as a whole class, and there's a topic and a project. So you're learning not just the writing and the long form, as I mentioned, long form journalism, but also the design elements. And they also do a practical class where they do a book publishing, and they actually publish a book at the end. So it's really important to them, not just that you become a great writer, which is very important, and take those classes that really teach you how to be a great long form writer and be an interviewer, but also that you understand the design elements that go into whether it's book publishing, online publishing, print on demand. There's sort of this whole new world in the media industry. I think, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, they said journalism is dead, and then they realized that's not true, right? There are all of these great jobs. It's just that they're not the traditional, investigative reporter for the Washington Post. The jobs are elsewhere, and this program is designed to give you the flexibility to move within the marketplace, expose you to what those kinds of jobs are, and also network. I mentioned in the beginning that this is the place that you want to be if you want to do journalism, and it's really through these programs. There's a fieldwork program, a fieldwork class. You actually are meeting people in the industry. It's really important to them that you're networking and taking advantage of our location in New York City. And then the last is a certificate in gender and sexuality studies. And this is mostly done by students who are part of the program. So are part of another master's program in the new school, not just within NSSR. There's 1 core course and then 3 elective courses. So if you're interested in gender and sociology, you would probably also be a part of the gender and sexuality studies program. If you're interested in philosophy and gender, there's a lot of crossover, and you can take a class in, Parsons if you're interested in the body and philosophy. So the co-chairs currently are a psychology student, a psychology faculty member, and a Parsons faculty member. So you'll see that there's a lot of students who take part of this program who are not just not just doing it for the certificate, but are doing it to add to their education. Any questions about any of these departments? Okay. So we talked a little bit about the centers, but I just want to point out that this is another example of the interdisciplinary work that takes place at NSSR. So Zolberg is currently being run by a sociologist and an anthropologist. Janet, who is an anthropologist, mentioned she's part of the Heilbronner Center for Capitalism Studies. So is our dean, Will Milberg, who's an economist. These programs are, for the most part, not homed in any one department and not belonging really to just one discipline. They really are places for people with different ideas to come together and express themselves. So I mentioned Simon Critchley, who edits The Stone, Diva Woodley, who is a politics faculty member. Nancy Fraser sits in both politics and philosophy. She's really one of the foremost thinkers of foremost feminist theorists of our time. I traveled with her when I was in Europe, and I cannot tell you how many people came just to meet Nancy Fraser. They couldn't believe they could meet her in person. It's sort of amazing, but she is one of our faculty members. Jim Miller heads the Creative Publishing Critical Journalism program, and he's, I think, a hoarder. His office is sort of terrifying. I couldn't understand why he only wanted to meet in my office for the first 2 years I was at this job, and then I had to drop something off at his, and I understood it. But he's brilliant and really interesting to take classes with. And Dick Bernstein is also a philosopher of real prominence. And that's Ann Stoller, which Janet Roitman mentioned earlier in the Anthropology department. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process and answer your questions about that. So the admissions date, so none of you guys are interested in spring, but if you are interested in spring, the priority deadline is passed, but we're still accepting spring applications. I would just really encourage you to get them in the next week or two, because faculty leave for break, and it's harder to get decisions when faculty are no longer here. For fall, the priority deadline is January 7th, and this is the fellowship deadline. So if you're interested in, I'm going to talk about funding, but if you're interested in a fellowship, it's important that you apply by January 7th. We do accept applications on a rolling basis after that. I can tell you, are any of you interested in PhD versus MA? So I can tell you for the PhD, although we say rolling decisions, it's true that it's primarily targeted at the MA students. The PhD application may be open past January 7th, but they are determining their class based on students who are applying at that point. And if the application is open in March and you apply in March, then you're hoping that someone they've made an offer to turns down that offer, because they're not holding seats for people who are applying late in the PhD. On the MA front, we do accept applications on a rolling basis, but the fellowships are awarded to students who apply early, who apply by January 7th. The international deadline, the final deadline to apply, is June 15th for international students, and that has to do with visa issues. And for domestic students or permanent residents, it's August 1st. So these are the pieces of the application. We are online. We don't have paper applications for the NSSR MA or PhD application. And I'll talk about each of the pieces. So the first is the test scores. If you're a US citizen, we require GREs if you graduated college in the last 5 years. We don't require them for students who graduated after that, or I guess, yeah. Before that, right? Yeah, that doesn't sound right. If you graduated before that, or if you're an international student, if we're the only school you're applying to and GREs are an issue, you can always send me an email and we can talk about that. If English is not your first language and you did not go to an English-speaking university for your undergrad degree, then we do require TOEFL, IELTS, or PTE scores. We need transcripts from all post-secondary institutions. So if you did a bachelor's and you studied abroad and those grades and courses appear on your transcript, that's fine. But if you studied abroad and it just has it's a semester abroad, we actually need that semester abroad transcript from the place you studied abroad. If you transferred schools and the grades and courses appear on your home transcript, again, fine. But if all it says is list of courses and TR, meaning transfer credits, then we need that transcript from the previous institution. Even if you don't graduate from these institutions, we still need transcripts from them. We don't need your yoga instructor certificate, but if you prior to coming here you were not in you've never taken a psychology course, you wanted to try one at a local school, we need that transcript even though it's not a school you were necessarily enrolled in full time. We also require a resume, and this is sort of a standard business resume, but I always say that with a caveat, this is like a business resume plus. If it's not in there, we don't know that you did it. So I would not be so worried about trying to keep it to a short length. I'd be more concerned about making sure we get all the information in that resume. So if you did research with a faculty member at your university, please describe the research and your role in the research. If you were involved in clubs and organizations that are relevant to your degree, please, don't just list the name, but describe the activity of what you did there. Same thing with employment. I don't need every job you had in, since you were a kid. I don't need the babysitting job with a description on there. But if what you did was important for us to know, you need to describe it in some detail, more so than you might for a job application. So the statement of purpose is incredibly important. Most students do not just apply to NSSR, they apply to other institutions as well. And you can use some of what you wrote for other institutions, but if all you do is change the name of the school in the statement of purpose, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. When we assign merit aid, when we assign fellowships, and even admissibility, we're looking to see whether a student is not just capable of doing the work, but a fit for our school. And if you don't tell us why you are a fit for our school, it leads us to believe that you're either not that interested or perhaps not that good of a fit for us. So do a little research. Look at the faculty. Each department has a website that lists all the faculty. Read their bios. Look at some of the courses that are offered. Look at some of the interdisciplinary centers. If you can't answer for yourself why we're a good fit for you, you probably shouldn't be applying here, right? I mean, if you look at all those things and you think, I don't know how I fit myself into this box, then we're not the right school for you. And as much as you're convincing yourself, you also want to convince us that you were a good place to study. So I would say that, 75% of the essay can be the same essay, but it's really important that you devote time to talking about why this school is a good fit. So in the personal statement, not just why us, but also why this discipline, what do you want to do here, and what have you done to get yourself prepared to be here. So talking about prior work, prior research. Sometimes people, have never studied economics, but they're reading Marx at home every night and Keynes before bed, and that's the prior work that they've done. So really telling us why you're interested in the discipline and what you want to study here. The academic writing sample is also really important, 10 to 20 pages for MA students, more than that for PhD students. I think the limit is 40. So if you have a thesis that is, 60 pages, perhaps pare down to a section. If you need to give a setup for that, that's fine. But I wouldn't, the faculty don't have time to read 100 pages, so I would not think more is more here. But this should be really the best example of your work. So most students submit to us a writing sample from a class that they had previously at their institution. If you got feedback on your writing sample, you turned in a paper, you got an A, but there were still comments in the margins suggesting that you make changes, before you submit to us, you should make those changes because our faculty read them. So they will probably have similar thoughts and feelings about what could be improved in an essay. And so before you submit, not just to us, but also to other institutions, I would suggest that you spend an hour or 2 hours making sure that this is polished and really the best example of your work. It should be ideally related to the discipline in which you're applying, but if you're someone who's changing fields, it doesn't have to be. If your best example of work was in the literature field and you're switching to philosophy, that's okay. They're really looking for your critical thinking, writing, research, and persuasion techniques. For journalism, as I was saying before, you don't have to submit an academic writing sample if you're writing for the school paper. If you have an online forum where you are writing articles, you can put together a compilation of articles and submit those to us that are 10 to 20 pages. But they should be, substantive and not a press release for an activity that's taking place on your quad in a week. It should really be reflective of your ability to research and write persuasively. You asked for the writing sample? I feel like that covers it. Okay. And then letters of recommendation. These are taken very seriously by our faculty. If you're planning to apply by January 7th and you have not already asked your recommenders for letters, I would encourage you to do that immediately. Do that this week. Do that tomorrow, because you do not get great letters of recommendation when you say, hi, can you write me a really detailed letter by tomorrow? You tend to get a much more form version. When you're asking your recommenders for letters, I would encourage you to do a couple of things. If you've already written your personal statement, give them the personal statement, give them your resume. If you're asking for an academic letter, so from one of your professors at university, if you have your favorite paper from the class, I might give them your favorite paper. Regardless of whether this is an academic or a professional letter, I would suggest giving them 3 or 4 bullet points of what you hope to see in the letter of recommendation, whether it's conversations you had with them, projects you worked on, moments in class or in the job where you felt like you really excelled. I think you're going to get a much more detailed letter if you give them something to do. I've written these letters of recommendation, probably some of you have as well, and they're a lot of work. They're actually hard work to write a good letter. letter. And so if you give somebody a foundation to work on, you're going to get a much better letter than if you just say to them, oh, I'm applying to this program. Tell them why you're applying to our program. Academia is a really small world. I can't tell you how many times I read faculty comments and it's, oh, this person recommended them and they know our program. So be sure you share with them who you're interested in working with if you know, and also that you're interested in our program, because you may be surprised to learn that they know one of our faculty members very well. And then I always say to let them know when you get in or when you've decided to enroll. It makes them feel good to know that they were part of the process. So what kind of questions do you guys have about the application? We'll go back to that. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Henry. Should we get the other one? Oh, we're good.
Thank you. When it comes to the GRE, can you talk a little bit about how that factors into the admissions process?
Sure. So it is probably the least important part of the admissions process. I would think that grades are much more important to our faculty than GRE scores. You know, your writing sample is going to be more reflective of your writing ability than the writing score on the GREs, but it is a data point. It's information that they use in making their decision. Some departments value it more than others. I think, economics, not surprisingly, is interested in the quant score. Philosophy, too, because there's a logic exams. I'm always surprised that they care about the quant score. Other departments kind of could care less about
Psychology
it.
also wants you to be able to use statistics. And, if your GREs are very low, but your grades are high, or vice versa, the admissions committee will ask some questions of itself about, why is this? So, okay.
I'm wondering, is there a different application process if you are interested in a fellowship for the MA and the PhD, or is it just they'll tell
Exactly
you?
the same.
Okay.
And I am going to talk about fellowships, but there is no separate essay for application for merit aid or for fellowships. And if you were admitted to the MA without a fellowship, when you reapply for the PhD, you're reconsidered for the fellowships. It's a new class of students.
Thank you.
You do have to answer yes to the question, do you wish to be considered for a merit scholarship? You'll find that on the form.
You said that if you graduated within the last 5 years, you have to submit the GRE scores.
Mm-hmm.
What if you graduated December 2013?
It's fine. You don't have to. Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's by the time you apply in January, and yeah.
About the letters of recommendation, it says 2, and we mean 2, no more.
So you're only allowed to submit 2 via the application. They ask for the names and the email addresses. If there's a third person that's really important, you can have them email the letter, not you, but that recommender, to enroll@newschool.edu. I would just be mindful of why you need a third letter of recommendation. It should really say something about you that the other 2 recommenders can't say. So there are times where it's certainly helpful, but also times where it's just additional information.
And remember that the admissions committee only has a certain amount of time to spend with each application, so you don't want to vex them with too much material. Nope.
I have a question about the letters of recommendation too.
Uh-huh.
Would you want to ideally have some professor who teaches in the same discipline as the one you're applying to, or can we have?
Yeah, so ideally both letters are academic letters and not professional letters, but that's not possible for everybody. If you've been out of school for 5, 6, 10, 20 years, as some of our applicants are, getting academic letters are not feasible. But ideally they are both academic letters, and ideally at least one comes from your discipline. But what is more important is that they know you well, that they can talk about your critical thinking, your writing, your research, your interest in the discipline, your scholarly potential. And if the only class you took in the discipline was a large lecture class where you got an A, but you never talked to the professor, then that's not going to be a very good letter. I would much rather see, and I think the faculty would much rather see, letters than from someone in your discipline who could really speak more specifically to you and your abilities. And again, I mentioned before, providing them with information. If you're changing disciplines, send them a paragraph about why you're moving disciplines, and you'd be surprised how often that's reflected back in the letter.
else?
Any other questions? Yeah, one more up front. Oh, I think Henry Paul's one. Okay, well, sorry.
For the academic writing sample, if you've been out of school for quite a bit of time, and your writing is significantly improved in that chunk of time, but you have been in a professional field and not doing academic writing, what would you suggest?
So
doing
you
a
have-
full research project, or
Yeah, so you really have two choices. If there's a, more timeless college essay, you could revise it to a way that would be appropriate now. Or you could write a new essay for the application. And that I would suggest taking two, an article or two, depending on, remind me of your discipline?
I'm going into psychology, but my background is economics and journalism.
So you might take a journal article one of a faculty member's written, right? There are a lot of psychology journals, and write an essay about that. Or you could take an issue in the news, right? So we talked a little bit about migration and mobility. I was talking to Professor Steele about how active the faculty were when they were separating or are separating children and parents from the borders and the impact that is having on children. You might take that issue in the news and write from a psychological point of view, researching what psychologists have said about it. It doesn't have to, I wouldn't aim for a 20-page paper. I might aim for a shorter paper on that front, but you could write a new paper for this purpose.
Okay.
Someone else had a question?
Yes, one more.
So I recently graduated from a college that didn't have the traditional GPA system. We used narrative evaluations instead. Is there any sort of supplemental document that I should attach? I know some schools have asked for a letter from the registration's office, from the registrar's office, explaining the narrative evaluation system, or they want the narrative evaluation from my senior thesis. Is there something that you would want in addition to that?
Henry, you want to answer that?
We have received many applications from such institutions like Evergreen and people have gotten in. Really, we understand that system. There's not much you can do about adding things. I would just make sure that all the application parts are as strong as possible. Perhaps people will look at the evaluations. They tend to be a little similar to one another, in my experience, and they sort of read like recommendation letters already do. But if you have any doubts, you might, and you're exempt from the GRE, you might want to take the GRE anyway, just as a way of strengthening your application. We'd never exclude anyone or admit anyone on the basis of a GRE score, so it's not a fatal thing one way or the other. Just remember that we have seen many of these applications with the evaluation rather than the GPA, and many students have gotten in and proved to be quite good.
I would just also add about the GRE scores. You're always welcome to send them in even if you're not required to submit them. But if you don't do well on them, and you're not required to submit them, don't send them in. It always sort of amazes me someone, does well in one section and just, I don't know, it's not their thing, it's not their kind of test, they had a bad day. They're not required to submit it in, but now they've sent in GRE scores that are not going to show their strengths. So if you're not required to send it in and you don't think it's reflective of your ability, I wouldn't send it in.
And if you have a score that you're going to be sending in anything in your application that may look a little weak, you can devote a small paragraph in your statement of purpose to explaining why that may have been happening. Maybe your GPA is lower than you think it should have been, and because you were ill one year, one semester, or something. Anything like that. You don't want to go into excruciating detail or make that the focus of your application, but you can use the statement of purpose to explain anything that doesn't look quite as good as it might.
All right, I'm going to do 2 minutes on funding and then get you guys out of here, but we'll stick around to answer any questions you might have. So all of the PhD departments offer fellowships. So the ones that don't, historical studies, liberal studies, CPCJ, our journalism program, don't offer fellowships. But all PhD granting departments offer two kinds. One is a full tuition scholarship, and one is full tuition plus a stipend of $20,000 a year. If you are awarded it as an MA student, it's a 5-year award. If you are a PhD student, it's a 3-year award. Some departments reserve their fellowships exclusively for PhD students. Other departments offer them both to MA and PhD students. But as I said before, if you are applying as an MA student and you aren't awarded a fellowship, you have the opportunity to be reconsidered for one if you stay and apply for the PhD. We do, however, offer really generous merit aid. The range is this year going to be 30% to 75% of tuition. I'm expecting the average award to be about 45%, so even more generous than last year. About 85% of students are offered merit aid, both in terms of those who are admitted and those who enroll. And all PhD students receive at least 50% scholarship if they're not awarded a fellowship. There's no need-based aid, it's all merit-based aid, and it is for both US and international students. We don't make any distinction between the two when we're awarding aid. Questions about that? Okay. And I think that's it. All right, so thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll stick around and answer any questions that you have. You met Henry. Josh Kramer is in the back, and they can also both answer your questions. Thank you, guys.